So yeah, let me go in and do that right
Good
now.
morning.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes. Oh, hold on. Let me turn the burner off. Okay. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for adding that pre-roll video.
Yeah,
I think
easy
that's going to
peasy.
dramatically increase our response rate.
I do too.
Yeah.
I do too.
Yeah. And I saw Robert's note about the counties not being added, but there's been zero review on it on these things. So
Yeah, what can you do?
yeah, there needs to be more proofreading. And in fact, I looked at Anna's trivia, and some of the answers are wrong. I mean, the footprint, and I even had it in my presentation, is 2,300 square feet for the average footprint, which is the same as the American household, and she put 5,000. So I don't know where she got that from.
Oh man.
And then I might tell her about this for tomorrow. The aircraft that she shows in the video that moved is
Yeah.
not the Spirit of Miami that Bonsack was talking about. It was a fighter jet that was discovered, a deep water fighter that was just discovered. It wasn't one that was intentionally deployed, that was lost. So anyway, yeah, it's all right. It is what it is.
Yeah, I mean,
That's
what can you
fine.
do, right?
Most people aren't going to notice. It's only
Right.
me.
It's you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So I
Well,
have one other thought that I wanted to run by you before other people get in, and that is for the moderators. I just was, a little concerned that I don't want this to be the Keith Milley show, because there's a large amount of people that are working on it. So for tomorrow morning, that's why I was thinking it would be good to have Leslie, but she can't do it. But I had remembered this morning that Kent Smith from day one had offered to help any way he could. And Kent Smith is a great moderator. So what are your thoughts about having Kent Smith and Christine Kittle?
I really honestly could care less as long as there's somebody there
Okay.
um that can do it and that doesn't make me work to help them moderate, you know?
Okay.
That's the only requirement is that I don't want a whole lot of private chatter going on. Like, I don't know how to share I don't want that. Like,
Yeah, no, Kent
they
would
won't
be,
have to share anything. I think Kent would be great. I think that's fantastic.
I think, sometimes Kent can, like Robert Turpin, share his own opinions, but I don't think so. I don't, he's been a great moderator in and the tomorrow mornings is pretty low key, you know, and I think he'll ask a lot of good questions if there's none in the chat box. So, okay, I'll reach out to Kent and to see his availability for tomorrow.
Okay, that's fine. I'm sorry, I'm distracted. I'm trying to get our feed loop ready to go.
So, Angela, I see your post in the public lobby chat.
About what?
Did you want to direct people to the session for the link, or are you going to put it in the main lobby too?
I'm going to put it in both places. That's what I've been doing.
Okay.
Because
Okay.
otherwise people are emailing me. I can't find it. So I just
Gotcha.
put it in both places.
Okay.
Yeah, so and I just updated the welcome message in the lobby. Although it doesn't look like it updated itself. So let me get that Zoom link up again.
Oh, so you have the poll right in there too. Okay. So they
Lots of
don't have.
places for people to join. I'm trying to make it easy on them.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'd like to see us max out the number of responses that
Yeah,
we
me
can get,
too.
you know?
Yeah, for sure,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah. And there was not, then, yeah, I wish that we had vetted, but like I was telling Jeff last night, I think we're into the gravy and the icing on the cake now with these little tidbits.
Yeah, I agree. Okay. Save. Save changes. Okay. So our announcement in the lobby should have changed to say join us live in our session today by clicking the Zoom link when it is pasted in the chat. So that should be up to date. And then I'll have my session chat Zooms ready to go at 7:59. So I have 9 minutes. So I'm not going to distract myself by talking to you, but I
Okay.
am going to share my screen just to see how it looks. I disabled all notifications. I'm closed out of everything. So I really hope that box goes away. And I'm going to hit share. And I'm going to hit this thing.
Okay. Yeah. It looks like you're sharing directly to the app. I don't see any toolbars or anything on the bottom.
Good. And now I'm going to hit play.
Good morning. Welcome to day 2 of the 2020 Florida Virtual
Yeah, no
Artificial
box.
Reef Summit.
Okay.
I'm Jessica McCauley, the Florida Fish and Wildlife.
And you hear it well?
Yeah, very. I had to turn the volume down. It's so well.
Yeah, she's loud. Okay, perfect. Perfect.
Loud is good. People can turn it down.
Loud is good. All right, I'm just going to have this minimized.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't have time to put the
I'm gonna
logo
minimize
on there.
That's
If
fine.
you can minimize it, that'd be fine.
Minimize it so people see that.
Yeah.
Okay, and now I can't see you, but I can do this. Oh, good. Now I figured this out. Now I can keep a tab on what's going on here. Where's the chat? I like to be able to see the chat more. There's the chat.
Yes.
There. Now I got them both. Okay. Because that was my problem. Yesterday I did not want to touch my screen because I was nervous about, but now I got it figured out. See, day 2, we're getting there. And now I'm going to mute myself, but I can still hear you if you need me, okay?
I can hear you fine. Yep.
Okay, I'm going to mute myself now.
Okay.
Okay, see you in a bit.
See you soon. I'm emailing Kent Smith now.
Cool.
Good morning, Angela.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I had to find my unmute button.
Oh, what did I do? All right. Cheers, everybody.
Cheers.
Today.
Okay. Refresh.
So Anna, will you be, I think we, since Christine and I are moderating this morning, I presume you'll need to be the co-host that you could, as a UF person in case something catastrophic.
Oh yeah,
happens.
let me make her. Oh, she's co-host already. Cool. She came in as
good.
co-host. Good.
Okay, yeah, perfect. I'm on it. Don't say that, Keith. Catastrophic.
We have to plan for the worst. That's how we are so successful.
It's true. You're absolutely right. Hmm. All righty. Well, I think the exhaustion of election anxiety caught up with me last night, and I actually,
Did you sleep?
yeah.
Good.
I slept from like 3:30 to 5-ish, and I felt as though I could just keep sleeping for the rest of the night. But I made myself get up.
That was a smart idea. Otherwise, you'd be up
Yeah.
at 3 a.m.
Yeah. Yeah, I took a little snooze, and then I still managed to, I mean, I still wake up 10 times, but at least I was back to sleep.
Okay, it's 7:55. What do you guys think? 7:59
To
To
join.
post it.
to
Yeah.
post it? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's
I
fine.
think we'll
Although,
get it.
yeah, we got Matt Ajamian. And Angela, do you want to,
We got
it's a
30 people in
video?
the lobby. What, Anna?
It's another video pre-recorded.
Yep.
You
Same
just
way
want
as
to
we
pull it
did it
up real quick
yesterday.
and see if we have the same.
We did.
I practiced.
Oh, you did?
It's not
Okay.
there.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Hopefully it's not there. I've like, I don't know. I've had a big long talk with my computer, so I hope that the problem has resolved itself now. But well,
Okay.
we will find out. But yeah, it wasn't there when we just practiced a minute ago.
Okay. As long as you had the big long talk with your computer.
We
That's
did. We had a big heart to heart.
cool.
Good morning, Christine.
Good
Christine,
morning.
I have a question for you
Yeah.
about tomorrow. Because I was planning on stepping in to moderate with you tomorrow morning as well. But since I'm also going to be on the panel and moderating today, and my face on the video, what part of my thinking in all this is just to have a different face. So I was remembering this morning that Kent Smith had offered to help any way he could, and Kent Smith is a really good moderator. Of course, he hasn't been involved with the mechanics on the Zoom. So for tomorrow morning, how would you feel about co-moderating with Kent Smith?
That's fine. I don't have a preference. I can also do it by myself too, if need.
Oh, no. That's gonna be this. I mean, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 speakers. I think that's, yeah, hopefully questions are going to be flying in left and right. So
Yeah, well, and I think all of them have different they all have similar topics, but the questions are going to be targeted to probably a specific speaker. Whereas with the county, it was more of a answer all kind of your experience.
correct.
So
Correct.
it'll be a little bit easier to navigate.
Yeah. Okay.
But that's fine. I can work with him, and I can kind of do more of the making more of the housekeeping stuff. That's totally during the presentations, making that be my primary responsibility, and then work with him for the Q&A monitoring.
Okay. Yeah. If you're okay with that, I mean, and for today too, because I thought it worked out well yesterday with Anna and I kind of lobbying it back and forth, and same thing with you and Victor. So let's do a little bit more of that today, but with you taking, more of the keeping an eye on the chat box. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So I'll once we start the play button, I will send an email to Kent and copy you, and he'll let us know. If he can't do it, then I'll do it again tomorrow. But we'll switch roles in that case, and you'll take the primary tomorrow, and I'll do the chat boxing.
Okay. Angela, before we start, can you make me a co-host, please? Or Anna?
Yeah, I'll do that right now.
Thank you.
Yeah, weird. I can't. It doesn't give me that option on your name, Christine.
Maybe
Okay,
I-
Christine, you're good.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Weird.
I'm gonna try and mute you, Keith.
I see Matt joined us. Welcome, Matt.
Here we go.
Hey, good morning. Sorry, I'm a little early, but
No, early is good.
looking forward to, you guys are doing a great job. I thought things went seamlessly yesterday. So yeah, congrats.
Thank you. You can always be early if you're going to compliment us.
Okay.
Those are the only ones we let in. Keeps our mood up.
Okay, guys, I'm going to post now at 8 a.m. into the feed loop platform. So you're going to start getting people. So be ready with your mute buttons.
Ready. Oh, no.
Yeah, the box have reappeared.
Box just came up, Angela, FYI, with a sound.
A water droplet sound. Weird.
Yeah, that is weird.
Oh, it's gone.
Yeah, I don't know how many places I have to disable notifications. Okay. All right, guys. Hopefully that fixes it.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning, all. You want all this off, right?
Yes, we are making sure everyone will be muted. Everyone's videos will be turned off. We will be beginning promptly at 8:05, right on schedule. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, George and Nick.
Good morning.
Good morning, Nick.
Good morning, Anna.
We are going to be starting promptly at 8:05, and we'll be busy muting everyone and turning everyone's cameras off. So if you haven't done that already, we will be doing it for you. So please mute your mics and turn off your cameras. Grab a good cup of coffee and get ready and comfortable to enjoy our keynote speaker at 8:05.
Good morning. Welcome to day 2 of the 2020 Florida Virtual Artificial Reef Summit. I'm Jessica McCauley, the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission's Marine Fisheries Management Director. Artificial reefs are important to the state of Florida, and they're also near and dear to my heart since I did my master's research on diet and prey demand of red snapper on artificial reefs off Alabama. In my current position, balancing the high popularity of artificial reefs with their biological contribution plays an important role in fisheries management. I'm very pleased to see the scope and quality of presentations scheduled for today and tomorrow's summit sessions. I look forward to the speakers challenging our thinking, advancing our collective knowledge, and helping all of us think more deeply about artificial reefs and marine fisheries management issues. I want to thank you for joining our summit in the virtual world this year. While we would rather meet in person, we are happy to have this virtual option, and we want to thank our partners at Florida Sea Grant and the Summit Steering Committee who have helped tremendously to transition to this virtual format. I also want to thank all of our speakers who are giving presentations or posters this week. We hope you use this time to ask questions, and I look forward to lively discussions on fisheries management and artificial reefs. Thank you.
I'm honored to introduce Dr. Bill Lindberg. Bill began his career with Florida Sea Grant in January 1981. In the early 1990s, Bill initiated a large-scale and long-term collaborative research project on habitat selection, trophic coupling, and density-dependent growth and condition. After 38 years, he retired in December 2018, although he thought he retired because he continues to still be active, and we are very honored to have Dr. Bill Lindberg as our plenary speaker this morning. Welcome, Bill. Take it away.
Oh, thank you, Keith. I appreciate that introduction, and want to commend you and Angela and the steering committee for putting together what I think is a really, truly beneficial program for this summit. When I heard the theme for this, immediately I thought of the question of, well, through whose lens should we focus? And then realized if I ask whose lens should we focus, well, the obvious answer to that is, well, of course, mine. Everybody would think theirs is the lens through which we should view the future. So I changed it to, through which lens should we focus? And that brought on another set of questions of, okay, now what do we really mean about focus? Are we, drilling down like focusing a microscope to get into the minutia and the details? Or are we looking far off in the distance? And I came to realize that given all the issues and diversity surrounding artificial reefs, we might want to think more like a single lens reflex camera, where we can focus on the main subject, artificial reefs, and play with the f-stop to bring some of the detail in the background into focus as well, because there's really a lot that comes into play when we're trying to think strategically about the future of artificial reefs. And that's really apparent when we think about the diversity of stakeholders that are involved in artificial reef programming. Everything from the local level to the state level to the contractors and manufacturers, the sectors that utilize artificial reefs for diving and fishing, and various regulatory or permitting agencies. And one of the things I want to point out here is that there's really only one or two of these categories that are producers of the science that we draw on for science-based management. Everybody else, to varying degrees, are consumers of the science. And that got me thinking that maybe we need to be thinking collectively about how we consume the science, what it is we're actually taking from the science that informs our decision. Because we don't all view artificial reefs in the same way, obviously. And so thinking about this, I had the privilege back in 2005 of co-chairing the working group on research and conservation for the FWC's strategic planning process for the Division of Marine Resources, or Marine Fisheries Management and Marine Resources at FWRI. And as part of that process, we engaged virtually every one of the stakeholder groups for FWC in the area of marine resources and particularly marine fisheries. And from all those stakeholder perspectives, these are the two bullets that came out as consensus. These are the perspectives that everyone could agree on. You know, there was a strong stewardship ethic, you know, a desire to see fishing as it used to be. You know, given the population growth in Florida, that's quite a stretch, but it is aspirational. And then everyone agreed without exception that protecting the marine fisheries habitat was essential, but not adequate without controls on fishing mortality. And that largely focused on water quality, nursery habitat, seagrass beds, mangrove, fringing mangroves, coral reefs, live bottom habitat. The collective stakeholders at that process really couldn't come to agreement on the role for artificial reefs. And you can imagine why. So, you know, we'll delve into some of that. But I believe for this diverse group, you know, these bullets provide us some common ground to begin focusing on the future. Now, when I first interviewed with Florida Sea Grant at the University of Florida back in 1980, as part of that interview process, Hugh Popenoe, who was then the Sea Grant director, asked me the question. I was fresh out of graduate school, raring to go, and he asked me, well, how would your research interests fit in within the mission of Florida Sea Grant? And so I outlined for him how behavioral ecology and the habitat relationships that I'd done for my dissertation could translate to helping to refine artificial reef technology. And this was his response. You know, we know artificial reefs work, so we're not likely to fund research into how they work. Well, you know, yesterday in the hindsight is 2020 section with both Hayward Matthews and Jim Bonsack, you heard a bit of that, you know, we know artificial reefs work, you know, let's get on with developing them. I'm happy to say that I was able to sustain a career's worth of continuous funding from various state and federal sources to pursue the research program that I outlined for Hugh that day. And I'll be sharing some of that a little bit later on. But during my career, the other thing that I really enjoyed doing was teaching a graduate course called Scientific Thinking in Ecology. It's part of the core curriculum for 2 graduate degree programs at the University of Florida, and it helps students to develop their critical thinking skills, to explicitly explore and develop their own philosophy of science, and introduce them and practice some of the frameworks for ethical reasoning, which we all encounter in our personal and professional lives. So realizing that we have a fair number of us here at the summit who are consumers of science rather than producers, I thought, you know, some of the principles from that class might help us to become more informed consumers. Now, for the sake of time, I'm really going to concentrate a little bit on the philosophy of science and leave the critical thinking skills, you know, for some discussion over beers someday. But you know, the question posed here is one that, quite frankly, you know, scientists, researchers rarely even ask themselves, what's your philosophy of science? But I would submit that you know, we all have a philosophy of science. That is, some conception of what science is, how it works, how we can use it. And so I share with the class, you know, this cartoon. Dana's pet horse says, you know, what do you want to be when you grow up, Dana? She answers, a preconceptual scientist. It's the new science of reaching a conclusion before doing research, then simply disregarding anything that contradicts your preconceived notions. That's the dumbest thing I've ever dismissed. The next panel down. So a preconceptual scientist, as a preconceptual scientist, you know, you reach a conclusion to a theory first, then you ignore all evidence that might prove you wrong. Yep. So you believe you're always right. Well, since we don't hear anything to prove us wrong. Logic dictates that we have to be right. Yeah, but just because you don't listen doesn't mean blah, 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 blah. Oh, I give up. See how easy that was? So yeah, my point is, we all have a philosophy of science, whether we're researchers or not. And part of science is retaining an open mind and critically evaluating how we take the data in and then translate it. So I want to point out too that most of the artificial reef research, but not all of it, has been done by ecologists. But ecology is not a uniform science. We don't all come from the same roots. We have quite different histories in terms of our subdisciplines in ecology, and these can be different in their philosophies and how they view essentially the same system or question. So it's important to understand the diversity within ecology when we're consuming the science that's produced. And I borrow this from a philosopher of science who specialized in ecology, Gregory Cooper, not to be confused with Alice Cooper of rock fame, but helps us to get a little bit of picture of how diverse the scientists we're listening to might be. And for those of you in fisheries science or fish ecology, you might think of it as analogous to Weinmiller and Rose's model of life history strategies in fishes. And for the rest of us, we might think of it as the old parable of the blind wise men from Punjab who first encountered an elephant. The one grabbing the trunk thinks it's strong and flexible like a snake. The guy with the tusk is saying, no, it's more like a saber. And the one on the front leg is going, nah, you all are wrong. It's really like a tree trunk. So, having some understanding of where the researchers are coming from can help us all to synthesize what they're trying to tell us. So I want to get you oriented to this first. So, on the one hand, the causal perspective, is primarily looking at cause and effect, primarily interested with ecological processes, and tends to prefer experiments as the way to go about doing their science. The phenomenological is mostly dealing with ecological patterns and using sampling designs and statistics to discern those patterns. And the theoretical is synthesizing the conceptual understanding of cause and effect and the resultant patterns, and generally does so in a more mathematical fashion. And yet, nobody covers the entire conceptual space. We're all kind of compartmentalized. So I think of myself as lying somewhere in this space. And as a behavioral ecologist, I'd like to try to test ecological theory or apply ecological theory, and my preference is to do experiments. I think I'd probably pigeonhole Chris Stallings and Jim Bonsack in that category. Over on the other side, you might think of the stock assessment modelers and the ecosystem modelers, as drawing on well-established theory and the available data to model what they would expect to find out in nature. Now, pertinent to our history with artificial reefs, those folks who have been more classically trained in ichthyology or fish biology tend to occupy this part of the conceptual space. And here you might find folks like Bill Seaman and Bob Shipp, who more systematic or nomenclature or taxonomy of fishes and phylogeny or the evolutionary tree of fishes, and fish biologists like Steve Bortone, who are really interested in the overall biology of the fish. and that helps to inform their perspective on artificial reefs. Now, we also have fish ecologists who are like the ichthyologists, classically trained, but they're more in tune with what the ecological theory and concepts are. And in that group, I might put Will Patterson and Steve Zettelmeyer. And Will might occupy a little bit more towards the phenomenological side of that space, and Steve a little bit more towards the causal side because of their difference in sampling and experiments. But using those two guys as an example, they have quite different perspectives on the efficacy of artificial reefs. And then, at the top or in another position I think of as the applied theoreticians. These would be folks like Carl Walters and his foraging arena theory, John Caddy and his demographic bottleneck theory, Alec McCall and his basin model of fish population dynamics. And so all of these things fit together, and all of them are pertinent to how we think about artificial reefs. Now, a little bit more philosophy, and I won't dwell on this too much, but up here we have the primary areas of philosophy that deal with what's true or what's known. Scientists mostly deal with the epistemology, experimental design, sampling design, the strength of the statistics, things of that nature. But the ontology and metaphysics are also important. Ontology is what do we take to be real, and metaphysics is what are the characteristics of what we take to be real. And where that plays out is when we think down here on the graph, I use dolphins for the marine science majors in an undergraduate course, but you can think of it as fish as well. We can all put our hands on a fish and we can identify it, we can measure it, weigh it, and so forth. That's pretty objective. Nobody's going to quibble about that. But then as we start scaling up, there may be a school of fish or a pod of dolphins, and we can see it break the surface, and we can say, yeah, there it is. But it's a little bit harder to actually define what its characteristics and dimensions are. Move on up to a population, and this is where we really have to start being disciplined in our thinking about what's being told to us. Because population, community, ecosystem, we can't get our hands on that, and all agree that this is what we're holding. There has to be a domain, an area of space and time that defines what it is we're talking about. And one example of where this plays out with artificial reefs is we often hear that reefs can increase biodiversity. And if you put a snorkeling reef off of the Panhandle beach, and you can increase the biodiversity accessible to the snorkelers in that region, and that's a good thing. But the domain of that claim is really just the location of that reef. The only critters on that reef are the ones that were available along the northern Gulf to colonize the reef in the first place. So it would be wrong to extrapolate that we can increase biodiversity from that example to increasing the biodiversity of the northern Gulf of Mexico. All right, so we really have to be careful about that when we're consuming and communicating what we're getting from the research effort. Now, for my own work as a behavioral ecologist, it really boils down to three simple resources. Almost everything animals do is related to eat, survive, and reproduce. Eat, survive, and reproduce. You have to eat to grow and produce gametes. You have to survive long enough. And then if you don't reproduce, well, what good did it do you? Now, all fish, all target species are variations on a theme, but yet they solve the equation differently. And so the variation in how they solve the equation is really important to us. This perspective has helped to inform my own research. And let me just run through some of the the development and scaling up of my own thinking. So in the 1980s, I was working on the scale of 10-meter plots for experiments up here off the FSU Marine Lab, and 300-meter experimental plots off of the Cedar Key UF Marine Laboratory. And so working with crabs, trying to test predictions from mating system theory. And sure enough, we could manipulate the habitat patchiness, the patch reef size and spacing, and modify the availability or the opportunity for each of these species of crabs to mate. But in the experiments down here in Cedar Key, we also noticed that the same response was seen not only in the stone crabs, but in octopus, in black sea bass, in gray triggerfish. And we got to thinking about how that could be and realized that these are organisms that orient to the structure for shelter and radiate out from that shelter to forage over the sand bottom. So we posed it as the resource mosaic hypothesis, and then had two aborted or failed efforts to use concrete culvert as materials of opportunity to scale up and test that resource mosaic hypothesis. You know, we couldn't get the experimental controls with the traditional reef construction practices of that time. So we proposed and were able to put in place, you know, the Swanee Regional Reef System beginning in, I think, 1991. And so 22 reef arrays over 22 miles, each experimentally controlling the habitat quality and the patch reef size and spacing. The gist of this of practical interest is that more materials doesn't necessarily mean more fish. You get more fish at that reef, but a fourfold increase in reef materials only gave you a 2 to 4-fold increase in the total abundance of fish. So the same materials spread out could actually support more fish. And we also confirmed expectations from the resource mosaic hypothesis that those critters on the at the lower density would have better growth rates. And that led us to think that perhaps GAG, which became our study system in the Swanee Regional Reef System, GAG may have a demographic bottleneck. And so we proposed the Steinhatchee Fisheries Management Area and implemented that. The first step was to establish standardized reef modules bracketing the Big Bend as monitoring stations for what would come out of this system. And we sampled that and continued to monitor the Swanee reefs and these reefs. And nature gave us the opportunity to test another set of predictions from the basin model from Alec McCall. You'd expect higher quality reefs to retain a high abundance of fish, even when the population is declining, whereas fish should abandon the lower quality reefs as the population declines. And so the red tide events of the 2000s allowed us to actually test that hypothesis with the monitoring going on before we built the Steinhatchee Fisheries Management Area, which we did build in the 2010, 2015, I forget now. But here we have 100 square miles off of Steinhatchee, Florida, that received 500 standardized reefs. The intent was to test the bottleneck hypothesis that having small, widely scattered reefs would afford the GAG not only shelter, but also the opportunity to grow at faster rates, thus improving their reproductive potential. Now, the sampling that went in to try to evaluate that compared the performance of GAG inside and outside the Steinhatchee Fisheries Management Area. And quite frankly, the results were a bit equivocal. We had everything from 1 to 4-year-old GAG occupying this region of the continental shelf, including the SFMA. And the only place we saw a difference was in the abundance and growth performance of age 1 GAG within the Steinhatchee Fisheries Management Area. There were more of them, and although their relative weights and growth rates didn't differ given the sample sizes we were working with. They did have higher reserves of fat within their organ tissues, suggesting that they may be indeed at better condition under those kinds of systems. Now, what that brings us to is the take-home messages. All of this work was done, in order to test predictions from theory. Ecological theory works. It's well established. It's corroborated. We ought to be using it in planning the future for our artificial reefs. Another big take-home message is when you're building reefs of high quality that is preferred by the fish, you can expect hyperstability and catch per unit effort. In other words, you can continue to have high catch rates at artificial reefs even while the stock is declining, even crashing as it did after the red tides. When we have large-scale developments of reefs, as we did with the Steenhatchee Fisheries Management Area, it alters the regional distribution of fish, at least for a while until a new equilibrium can be distributed or attained. But you're going to change the distribution of fish with large regional developments. And the reason for that is that fish move. Different species stay in residence for different periods of time and they have different movement patterns, but the movement of fish across the seascape really makes a difference as to how our modification of the seascape with artificial reefs is going to affect the overall population. Here, I'd say the work being done by Sue Lowry Barbieri and her colleagues is going to be really critical in the foreseeable future. And we know more about the fish and their behavior than we do about the fishers. And I think it's time that we really start, like Ed Camp says, the socio-ecological aspects of artificial reefs is something that we need to pay attention to. Humans are the top predator in our system. Now, as an experimentalist, it pains me to say it, but there's a limit to how we can scale up with the traditional scientific methods. As we start increasing the scale of our questions, that is, at the scale of the population or the ecosystem, we really have to be relying on models to begin answering those questions. We simply can't do the kinds of experimental manipulations that would give us clean answers. We have to employ the ecological modeling to do this right. So that's what I've learned from almost 4 decades of research in this area. But I'd like to return to the course I mentioned and the common ground. The third element of that course that I taught for over 20 years dealt with ethical reasoning and how we reason through ethical dilemmas. And I think we can agree that the issues surrounding artificial reefs do present us with a bit of a dilemma. How do we balance all of that? Now, in getting to that point, I'd like to introduce you to Thomas Soule. Now, Dr. Soule probably knows nothing about artificial reefs. He's an economist. Before his retirement just a couple years ago, he was a senior fellow at the Hoover Institute at Stanford University. And his specialty was to analyze from an economic perspective public policies and practices. And one of the common themes I've learned from reading and listening to him is that all too often, with the best of intentions, we implement a policy or undertake a practice without thinking through to the second and third order consequences. We do it for a good reason, but then what? But then what? And with the ethical reasoning that I've been teaching for 20 years, I've also wrestled with the issues pertaining to artificial reefs. And I've come to the conclusion that, quite frankly, it would be unethical for us to consider the future of Florida artificial reefs without having those second and third order consequences clearly in focus. And from that, I'd like to really commend Keith and Angela and the steering committee putting the summit together, for having not only later today, but also tomorrow, several presentations that are dealing directly with second and third order consequences or effects of artificial reef development. And I would encourage everybody to pay close attention to all of the talks and integrate what these other speakers are trying to share with us. And with that, I'd be happy to have any discussion or questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Lindberg. As I get my screen together. Good morning, everyone. My name is Keith Milley. I am the moderator for the Q&A session. And joining me is Christine Kittle. And Christine, can we see you there too? And if we have Dr. Lindberg on the screen, if you can turn your video on, we will see you as well.
Good morning, Keith.
Good
And
morning,
everyone
Bill.
else.
Good morning. Excellent. All right. So we have the three of us on video. Everyone else, will keep your videos off, and we encourage everyone to add your questions to the chat box below. We have 15 minutes that we've allocated for a Q&A session with Bill, and at which point we will be starting promptly at 9. What is the time? 9:10 a.m. Oh, so we are a little ahead of time. So we have about 20 minutes or so to chat.
Research and monitoring part 1 starts at 8:55.
Okay, thank you. There we go. That's our time limit. And Christine and Angela and all these other people in the background are keeping me in check. So let's start the Q&A session off. Please go ahead and put your comments in the box. I've got a couple chimed up here, and I guess Bill, starting with kind of your last slide, I thought that's a good way to start out with some of the first questions. What, in your opinion, are some of the most important second and third order consequences to consider with artificial reef development?
Well, the most obvious one is the effect that it has on the efficiency of the fishing fleet, and whether that change in efficiency results in higher fishing mortality associated with it. It's the net benefit, the net effect of the reefs that we have to consider, not just the biological production associated with the reef structure, but then what's being extracted. And I would like to think that through some modeling efforts, we can begin to ask whether there's some optimization possible in the amount of habitat that's being added, or having a change in fishing pressure on, say, with the the Nerder reefs being in state waters in the northern Gulf. Is that going to shift a higher level of fishing pressure onto earlier life history stages of some species? That could have consequences to what plays out at the later stages that are responsible for the reproduction. There's a lot of these types of things that play out.
Okay. Well, as the questions are coming in, we'll let questions flow in, and we'll pitch it over to Christine to ask some of these. But I guess another question could be, what are some of the inputs that are needed to scale up for ecological modeling?
That's a good one, and that's really where the experiments, well-planned experiments, could play a role in getting some of the parameter estimates for the models. What kind of growth rates? How does growth rate vary as a function of the habitat quality? Most of the stock assessment modeling is done at a very coarse scale relative to the ecological processes. But if we could ever get to a finer scale where we can evaluate the relative contributions of different segments of a species range, we could get, say, okay, can we improve growth rates or survivorship by decreasing natural mortality, or ask the question, how much would these parameters have to change? How much improvement in growth or reduction in natural mortality would you have to affect through reef development in order to see any kind of change at the population or stock level? And is that level of reef development even feasible? Would we have to scale up the reef development to such a degree that it's impractical to even consider before we start seeing, an ecological benefit to the biological population or stock?
I think that brings us to a question that I think was coming in on the chat from Sean Fitzgerald. Did you get that one, Christine? Yeah. So when you talk about scaling up and increasing development, could we reach a point? Oops, it's moving around. I need to be pasting this into here. Could we reach a point where we are so saturated with modules that the likelihood of overfishing would be very small?
Well, that's kind of what we were playing or attempting to do in the Steenhatchee Fisheries Management area. Take a large area and randomly distribute, the reefs without releasing their coordinates. So, so if people found them and fished them, that would be one thing, but we're not promoting the fishing on those particular reefs, and thinking that perhaps a needle in the haystack approach could improve things for the juvenile life stages of the gag. Could you reach a saturation point? Well, at the same time, you're distributing fishing effort across a large number of reefs. You're also distributing the fish across a large number of reefs as well. So, as Jim Bonsack, quite often says, if the population as a whole is limited by the fishing mortality rather than the habitat, you're affecting distributions of fish, but not necessarily the overall abundance of fish. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, I think it gets to some of the heart of that, and something I think that really only now in 2020, when we are receiving millions of dollars in appropriations for construction, that we are starting to realize, well, are we actually saturating the system? In the early days, things were quite different, but now we are, I think, at a level that we haven't seen before in Florida's artificial reef development. Perhaps we are approaching that.
Well, the other thing with the question about saturating an area with modules, and this goes to the foraging arena theory and our earlier work that led us to the resource mosaic hypothesis. And those are really flip sides of the same coin. They all have to do with that the structure, the role of the structure, and the role of the surrounding seafloor. And when you start concentrating a lot of materials in a small area, there is a diminishing return on that. And that's something we saw in the Swanee Regional Reef System, that more reef materials, we contrasted a fourfold difference in reef materials at a given location in the experimental design, and that fourfold increase in reef materials only gave a 2 to 3-fold increase in fish biomass. Right? So, there is a diminishing return because the fish have to, many of the species radiate out from the reef structure and forage surrounding the reefs. And the size of that foraging arena can impact how many fish are actually supported on a given reef. So you can saturate an area to the point where you get a diminishing return.
Excellent. So we've got some questions coming in, and we still have plenty of time, I think.
Keith, would it be okay with you and Bill if I make a quick
Yeah,
comment?
yeah. Come on in, Ed, and go ahead and turn on your camera too. Dr. Ed Camp, also who's a member of our steering committee. So I appreciate you jumping in, Ed.
Good morning, Ed.
Hi, Bill. I thought that Sean's question and actually the question I see in the chat right after Robert's are also super important. And the issue of potential saturation with reefs leading to a lack of overfishing concern is really, really relevant right now, especially with red snapper. But I think there's a couple processes that need to be sorted out. And this gets very much to Bill's comment on second and third order effects. So basically, I think if I'm understanding Sean's question correctly, Sean, what you're talking about is saying, well, we can put so many reefs in there that it would actually be maybe a challenge for fishers to just find the congregated fish or the aggregated fish. And so what that is implicitly assuming is that fish are going to distribute evenly across the reefs, which they may or may not. We know that some reefs are going to be more fishy than others for reasons that we're not entirely sure about. That's the way that structure seems to work. And if that's confusing, think about fishing, whether it's inshore or offshore, there's always some rocks that produce better. There's always some reefs that produce better. And then, so it's possible that fish will not be evenly distributed across reefs for reasons that are not sure to us when we put the reefs in. And then the second issue is this sort of second or third order effect of effort is not controlled in a recreational fishery right now. And so let us assume that fish do distribute pretty evenly across a large number of reefs. And so, the number of anglers that were going out last year have a lot of new options in terms of where to fish, and maybe each reef doesn't have that many fish. Well, if they have enough and if they're reasonably catchable there, we would expect effort to go up, or we would expect it to redistribute from other areas like fishing natural bottoms, or potentially from other species targeting entirely. So those questions really have to be sorted out. And I think this is where it's really easy for us in general. And this gets to Bill's comment on the economist who said how bad humans are in general at recognizing these second and third order effects. It's really hard for us to anticipate how human behavior will change to a change in the fish behavior to a change in the habitat. We haven't done a great job of that. And now this gets into two other points real quick. And one is if the fish have a separate area and you're actually sucking effort away from some other habitat type, then we're moving closer to actually what Sean's question is getting at. You can actually have hyperdepletion, where say if you have red snapper that are actually, once they get big enough, they move away from reefs to mud flats, but the fishing effort is still stuck on reefs because that's where people want to fish, then you could potentially lessen the concerns of overfishing that way. Now, the other thing is to Robert's question of like, well, why do we care about efficiency of fishing if we're limited quota anyway? The issue is the shortened seasons. So if we close that quota out shorter and shorter, meaning less and less time, that's an economic hit on the local coastal communities, as well as a social hit on anglers who don't like shorter seasons. So the issue isn't that we don't want people to spend less gas getting to fish and getting their limit. It's that we don't like people being unsatisfied with having, a 1 week, a 2 week, a 3 week season, which we've seen, in spades with red snapper.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you, Ed. Yeah, you can see quite clearly why it was time for me to retire. These young up and coming researchers really have their heads screwed on straight.
Well, Phil, I think that's a good part in all the many students who have gone through your courses over the years. And I do remember when John Dodger and I think we were on our way to one of our workshops, and we decided to carpool, and we sat in on one of your, I believe it was even one of your philosophical classes, which brings me to my next question, and that is, how can we help people, our artificial reef managers specifically, and also other stakeholders, think more philosophically about the artificial reef work that we're doing?
That really is a practical challenge, because the folks who are actually implementing the reef programs are very much and appropriately focused, at the local level, the local scale, responding to the stakeholder interests within their community, and developing their reefs, at an almost county by county level. Whereas when we think about the aggregate effect of all the reef development, that cuts across a large number of counties, and we don't really have a highly coordinated regional reef development, let alone reef strategies at the level of fishery stocks or target species. And so the guidance, I would think, my own view is that the guidance on that more population strategic thinking would have to come from the state and perhaps even the federal level. NOAA Fisheries and FWC may be able to provide some guidance as to what kind of reef development could satisfy the local interests and also satisfy some of the mandates for management at the stock level. That's where the modeling has to come in, I think. The modeling and the theory needs to inform what that strategy would be. And then I've long been an advocate that the proposals for reef projects should have clearly stated objectives. And if the objectives are economic and user satisfaction, those are legitimate objectives and they ought to be articulated as such, but then the monitoring ought to be focused on those objectives rather than simply doing fish counts. On the other hand, if the reefs are being justified as somehow enhancing the ecological condition of the population, then that has to be well justified too by the rationale of how you would expect the biological benefits or ecological benefits of the reef to translate or propagate to the population level. And that's where the theory comes in. That's where the modeling comes in. And so, can you optimize the benefits to user satisfaction and biological benefits? I may be too much of a cynic in my own old age, but I'm not sure that the same reef can satisfy both the anglers and the fish. Right? So there may have to be some conception of partitioning the investment in reefs to accomplish these different and perhaps competing objectives. Maybe more of an optimization problem, but I'll defer to the modelers on how one might pull that off.
Yeah, that's a really good sum up, and I think the program that the steering committee has put together, especially over these next couple of days, we'll try to get towards some of that. Christine, did you have a question from the chat box or other?
We've mostly hit upon all of them. I guess since we're talking about the modeling, there was a question on how close are we to developing a model at like a statewide scale or a more regional scale, and what would be the limitations of that scale?
I'm not sure I can answer that question. Some of the work that's going to be presented later today and tomorrow will approach that. We'll tend to get at that. I see Ed has popped up there.
Yeah, but Ed, we really only have like 1 minute left, so maybe we can continue this during some of the other discussions.
Yeah, well, let's hold it. I think that question will be addressed later in the day.
Yes. Okay. I guess another question that came to my mind is, a lot of times we see artificial reef managers, especially when the proposals are generated from the local fishing club, that may have a specific species of interest. There's a design to be very species specific, perhaps to enhance the recreational opportunities. but how do we I guess work towards not being so focused on one species? Maybe drill down a little bit into the partitioning idea that you mentioned.
I'm not sure you can really get away with setting a priority for what are you designing for. The red grouper and gag grouper both seek shelter, but they use habitat in quite different ways. And what works for gag wouldn't work for red grouper. So picking the priorities and concentrating the design around those priorities, to me, seems to be a logical approach, unless your objective is one of trying to mimic natural habitat for more of a restoration objective.
Gotcha.
That would be the way you'd have to think about it.
Well, Bill, that is kind of a perfect conclusion to this discussion session. We're going to roll right into the next set of presentations. And here we go. Behind the scenes, Angela is queuing up the next set of presentations where we'll continue to explore some of these concepts. Thank you, everyone, for sticking with us. And we will see you again at the end of this, and we'll have a new set of moderators. Take it away. I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Chris Stallings. Chris is with the University of South Florida College of Marine Sciences, and he's been there for 10 years. Welcome, Chris, and take it away.
All right, well, thanks, Keith. And I hope everybody is safe and healthy out there. I know we all wish that we could be together, but huge kudos to Angela and Keith and the entire steering committee for pivoting not once, but twice in being able to pull off this summit. So great job, and thank you guys. Today, I'm going to share with you an overview of some of the research we've been doing on artificial reefs in my lab over the past 7 years. And I'm going to cover a lot of ground, so in doing so, I'm going to be skipping out on some of the details. However, I will be.
I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Chris Stallings. Chris is with the University of South Florida College of Marine Sciences, and he's been there for 10 years. Welcome, Chris, and take it away.
All right, well, thanks, Keith. And I hope everybody is safe and healthy out there. I know we all wish that we could be together, but huge kudos to Angela and Keith and the entire steering committee for pivoting not once, but twice in being able to pull off this summit. So great job, and thank you guys. Today, I'm going to share with you an overview of some of the research we've been doing on artificial reefs in my lab over the past 7 years. And I'm going to cover a lot of ground, so in doing so, I'm going to be skipping out on some of the details. However, I will be around for the entire summit, so please feel free to reach out to me. My email address is also provided here on the title slide, as well as on the final slide, so feel free to also email me. So this is the study system that we've been working in over the past 7 years. It's located in the eastern Gulf of Mexico, off the Tampa Bay region. And in 2013, we established 8 reefs that are located at depths from about 10 meters out to about 30 meters. And they are arranged in pairs of natural and artificial reefs. And we did this so that we could isolate the effect of reef type from other biotic and abiotic factors that we know can affect the patterns and processes on these reefs. More recently, we've expanded our sampling universe to include 6 additional artificial reefs. These are the ones shown as the white triangles. And we've yet to pair these up with natural reefs, but that is in the plans. And of course, we can use different stratification schemes to look at these reefs, of course, by reef type, as well as depth. And adding these new reefs here in 2020 have added that mid-depth range, as well as distance from the mouth of Tampa Bay. And this is something that we've more recently become interested in, because Tampa Bay is a large estuary, and with every tidal flux, it moves a lot of nutrient-rich water out onto the shelf. And so we're interested in the influence of that on these reefs. Now we've completed a number of different studies out on these reefs, and of course they had different questions and objectives. But the entire time of doing those studies, we have maintained a seasonal reef fish assemblage survey using the Bonsack-Bannerud method. And just a little bit by the numbers, over the past 7 years, we've conducted nearly 1,100 reef fish surveys, counted over 500,000 fish from 177 taxa. And a large part of this work has been shouldered by highly trained graduate students in my lab, as well as other graduate students that are getting training and other volunteers. And so this has hopefully provided them with opportunities to get out to the reefs to conduct their research and given them training. But it's been a two-way street, because they provided an enormous amount of work on these reefs and have been just phenomenal to work with. I'm very lucky to have such wonderful people. And I say this kind of jokingly, but we all know the importance of having a boat that's running well. So knocking on wood about the health of those twin Yamahas. And of course, this has resulted in 10 scholarly publications. And as I'll show you today, we've got several more studies that are in the brew. So our approach has been to take a multifaceted, holistic approach to science on artificial reefs. And I'll walk you through that for the remainder of my talk today, starting with, of course, population dynamics. And so this is why we conduct those seasonal reef fish surveys. And my PhD student, Mike Schramm, has been digging into these data. And so for the next 2 slides, I'm just going to show you some of the things that we can do with it. It's not about the graphs themselves, but more of all the different things that we can do with the data. We can do things like look at the biomass across depth and reef type. We can look at whether biomass of individual species varies with reef type. And in fact, Mike has shown that for most of the fish that we see out there, it does not differ. But for a small subset, it's higher on artificial reefs, and another, it's higher on natural reefs. And so the logical next question is to tease out why that's the case. Now, this is a really interesting finding that I will talk a little bit more about. We found that the species richness on these reefs has steadily increased over the past 7 years. And we've ruled out sampling artifact as a reason for that. So the rate of increase does not differ between natural reefs and artificial reefs, but it does differ from zero. So this is a significant trend. And this is a fairly new result, but as we've been digging into it a little bit deeper, it looks like this could be another example of range expansion of tropical species into our subtropical waters. We've also produced an extremely large amount of data, and so we're looking at these data from a couple of different angles to describe the structure of the food webs. We're doing this in one way with EcoPath with EcoSim, and this is being led by Tiff Raetzel and her major professor, Cam Ainsworth. And then again, Mike Schramm is doing the same using stable isotope analyses. And this can not only tell us the structure of the food web, but it can also help us understand the relative roles of Tampa Bay, those Tampa Bay waters, because that can influence the relative influence of benthic sources versus phytoplankton sources within those food webs. So we're also interested in stakeholder participation. And I know some people are familiar with this study because I presented it before, but we use passive acoustic receivers to listen to boat noise on these reefs. And we can turn that boat noise into numbers. And we found that visitation rates were 3 to 10 times higher on artificial reefs compared to nearby natural reefs. And because nearly everybody that's visiting these reefs are fishing either by hook and line or by spearfishing, that also suggests that fishing intensity is higher on artificial reefs. And we'll come back to this result in just a moment. We're also, we've also developed and have been using novel technologies to study the patterns and processes on these reefs. Now recall that we use the Bonsack-Bannerud method, which involves a diver staying stationary over the bottom, but spinning in a circle and counting all of the fish in this imaginary cylinder around them. Well, my colleague, Chris Koenig, who is truly a Renaissance man, invented a system that you can attach a GoPro to, and then the GoPro will spin in a circle just like the diver, essentially mimicking the Bonsack-Vanderroot method. So I then took these video systems and conducted a field experiment and found that to see whether they're given the same information, and found that for most species, they are. However, for a small set of species that are attracted to bubbles, and another group of species that are cryptic or small, we get higher counts with the diver method. But there's another group of species that we got higher counts with the video method, and then these tend to be species that are targeted by spearfishmen. So this makes sense. The ones that are still alive are probably doing so because they're avoiding divers. So the next step in taking a couple of these different technologies is, given that fishing intensity is higher on the artificial reefs, and that fish species tend to avoid divers, my master's student, Jess Van Varenberg, is asking, well, is diver avoidance stronger on the artificial reefs compared to the natural reefs? And so she's doing a much more detailed analysis than what Chris and I did, and separating it by reef type. Now, I don't have time to go into these other components of our holistic approach, but I did want to at least mention them. We've done an enormous amount of biological sampling on these reefs to look at whether fecundity or tissue production varies with reef type and depth. And likewise, we've looked at the reef benthos, the patterns of the benthos across depth and reef type, as well as teasing out the mechanisms that might be driving those differences. And this was Kara Wall's really nice master's thesis. So I've gone over a lot in 10 minutes, but the two big take-home points here are, first of all, we're taking this holistic approach to our science in this system. And by looking at it from all different angles, this has helped us to reveal things that we might not have seen if we just took a single approach. And also, I hope that I've been convincing about the importance of these long-term time series data. If we had only gone out for a couple of years, we would have missed this really interesting signal of increased species richness. And these also give us nice baselines to measure against disturbances, whether they're chronic disturbances like the Deepwater Horizon incident, or more chronic disturbances such as climate change. Thank you, and once again, here's my email address at the bottom, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Chris. Next up is Dr. Matt Ajamian. Matt is connecting to us from his office in Fort Pierce at FAO Harbor Branch, where he's been a professor there for just about 5 years. Welcome, Matt, and take it away.
Hey, thanks, Keith, and thank you to everybody involved with setting up this summit. Excited to talk to you guys a little bit about moving beyond reef fish, and this is understanding habitat use of highly mobile species in the context of artificial reefs like sharks. And I just want to recognize my co-authors, Mike McAllister, and some of my colleagues from the Hart Research Institute in Corpus Christi, Texas, where I worked before coming here. So why do this talk? Well, I think it's important that we start to maybe shift gears a little and start incorporating highly migratory species and their use of artificial reefs, because we're starting to really recognize this. And this is important because these species themselves have tremendous economic value, either for ecotourism or for exploited fisheries themselves. And in addition, we're getting better at our ability to track how they use these rather stationary environments. So we can use, even though these are obviously very dynamic species and mobile, we can use persistent presence approaches to track their use of these systems, whether biotelemetry or long-term monitoring sensors. And this is also important to do now because there are concerns that shark depredation, meaning consumption of a target species such as a snapper grouper, is occurring in multiple areas, and this may be habitat specific. And actually, NOAA has this as a research priority right now to understand some of that specificity. And we know that sharks, in particular, use artificial reefs. And here's an example from a recent paper by Paxton et al. 2020, where they looked at densities of both transient and resident predators on artificial and natural complexes off North Carolina. If you're looking to do a great artificial reef dive, I highly recommend Shipwreck Alley there. And that's where you see lots of these sand tigers on these ship-like artificial reefs, and at much higher abundances at those sites. So here's demonstrating that, at least in this area, those species are making use of those systems. And even if you go to the North Sea, you can see this as well. So here are photographs of porbeagle sharks, or relative to the makos and white sharks, off an oil and gas platform in that area. So it's not just with respect to warm temperate or subtropical areas. And speaking of oil and gas platforms, you have a tremendous network of these in the Gulf of Mexico, where I used to work. And these are depicted in these black dots here. That brown box is the Texas mid-coast area off of Corpus Christi, which is where I used to work. And we were in particular studying decommissioning options of oil and gas platforms, which are converted into reefs, or more prominently named the Rigs to Reefs program. So while we were studying those, and really the focus was to look at reef fish, we did come up across several sharks during our surveys. And here are just some examples. On the left, you can see just two photo shots of sandbar sharks, and on the right, scalloped hammerhead. So it really started to make us think a little bit more about how these species are using these habitats, because we would see them so frequently at these sites during these surveys. So we started to fit some of these animals with electronic tags. So here's a sandbar shark getting fit with an external acoustic tag, and we track their movements at some of these sites as well. So here's a graph of detections of one particular sandbar shark. In red, you can see these dots, and that's the number of detections over time on the x-axis. And you can see, obviously, very dynamic in terms of how long they're at the site on a given day. But as you can see throughout the year, there are very few days in which they're not there. So it shows that they're potentially relying on these ecosystems. With scalloped hammerhead sharks, we fitted them with surface transmitting tags called spots, track their movements on a much coarser scale. And we did find through some generalized additive modeling that the closer you get to an artificial reef, actually the higher probability of their presence. However, that was a bit occluded by the fact that you see the very similar pattern when you also look at natural hard bottom. We took a look at this with tiger sharks as well in a recent paper we published in PLOS ONE. You can see two major hotspots that show up in the Gulf of Mexico in terms of where these animals tend to hang out. And in those, you can see a lot of these black dots, once again, oil and gas platforms, but they're also near shelf edge habitats as well as natural hard bottom. So again, it makes it a little difficult to say what's driving these animals' distributions. So what about Florida? Because this is the Florida Artificial Reef Symposium. Well, what's our evidence of artificial reef use by sharks in this area? I'm going to just show you a video compilation from some BRUV surveys, or baited camera surveys, that we did off of St. Lucie County. So you can see a nurse shark swimming by there. And here's a deeper reef site where you can see a sandbar shark kind of circling above this concrete pile field. And here's a great hammerhead crossing in front of the camera in front of one of the more popular shipwrecks here. And then even a white shark crossing over above some concrete rubble in some of the 140-foot deep reefs in the area. Our other surveys in the area have made use of autonomous vehicles, such as this Teledyne Gavia. You can see clearly some blacktip sharks kind of roaming around the edges of this artificial reef on the Gulf Coast off of Sarasota. I also, out of interest, requested some data from the FWC, and thanks to Jeff Renshin and Brent Winter for supplying this. And you do see that for certain species that they occur more frequently on bottom set videos at artificial sites over natural sites. You can see that for a variety of unidentified Carcharodontic sharks, as well as bull and nurse. But it doesn't hold for all species, so I think there's a lot more work to do so far. So in conclusion, I think there's growing evidence and data sets on shark use of artificial reefs in this region. This leads to a number of questions, such as how transient are individuals when they use these reefs? Is there a reef type preference that we're seeing as shown off in North Carolina? As well as what is the importance of the proximity of natural habitat, particularly hard bottom? So what are we going to do next? Well, I think we can maybe start consolidating some information. As you saw there from the FWC video data set, I think we can do a little bit better job at that and look more closely at some of the habitat specificity. I also think we can design experiments to understand how reliant these animals are on artificial reef prey, such as snapper grouper species that might be using these reefs, and track those interactions as well. And then lastly, once we figure this out, communicate the results to regional fishery management councils, as well as HMS, as these have very important implications for new developments such as offshore wind infrastructure, which mimics a lot of the artificial reef infrastructure that we study here. So a lot of implications potentially. And lastly, I just want to acknowledge all these wonderful people and organizations that have supported this program over the years. So thank you, and I'll take any questions.
I'm honored to introduce Dr. Alistar Harborne. He is with FIU. He's been there for about 5 years. And unlike his background, he is not connecting from underwater at the Aquarius habitat. Rather, he is connecting from his home in Davie, Florida. Welcome, Dr. Harborne, and take it away.
All right, well, thanks, Keith, and thanks everybody for watching. Today, I want to talk about our project where we're looking at the effects on natural reefs of predatory fish that aggregate around the nearby artificial reefs. And before I start, I just want to acknowledge my co-authors on this project, which are listed down there at the bottom. So it's by way of introduction, we know that artificial reefs have a distinct fish assemblage compared to natural reefs, and that's often characterized by a high biomass of predators. But what we know less about is the interactions between fish on artificial reefs and those fish on natural reefs. So for example, do all those predators hanging around that artificial reef, do they increase the predation rate on fishes on nearby natural reefs? And without that information, it makes it hard to make recommendations about the spacing between natural and artificial reefs. And so that's what we're addressing through this project. And we're investigating how those natural and artificial reefs interact, as you'll see, using acoustic tagging, food web modeling, and also some behavioral observations. So the artificial reef that we're dealing with here is maybe a little bit different to other talks during this summit. We're talking about Aquarius Reef Base, or ARB, which is the world's only underwater research habitat operated by FIU in the Florida Keys, just close to Key Largo. And it's a place where scientists and other researchers can saturate, they can live underwater and have almost unlimited dive time to do their research. So it's quite a unique place. But importantly for this project, it functions effectively like any artificial reef. And in particular, it has a high abundance of snapper and barracuda. You can see the schoolmaster snapper shoaling in the top picture. The bottom picture is not a great picture. You'll have to take my word that this is a big school of barracuda as shot from the portal in the habitat. So we have this high abundance of predatory fish on this artificial reef. This reef is close to Conch Reef, which is the surrounding natural reef, which in itself is protected. It's one of the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary SPA protected areas. So I should say up front that as we think about this interaction between artificial and natural reefs, we're at one end of the spectrum. We're talking about a relatively small artificial reef that's relatively close to a natural reef. Inevitably, it has to be because researchers need to go and work on those natural reefs. So it's very close by. So I'll talk at the end about how we might expand the scope of this project. And so our key questions we're thinking about: to what extent do all those predators residing on ARB visit and forage on nearby reefs, and also potentially leave that no fishing zone, which could be interesting for other artificial reefs that are in no take zones that might wonder how accessible those fish are to fishermen as they leave those protected areas. We're also trying to work out whether the food web at ARB is self-sufficient. Is there enough prey to support all those predators, or does it require a subsidy from the surrounding natural reefs? And then finally, what are the effects of the aggregations of predatory fish on the behavior of fish on surrounding reefs? So in particular, we're going to be looking at herbivores particularly parrotfish, which are functionally very important in terms of grazing seaweed on natural reefs. So I'm just going to jump straight in and talk about the acoustic work. So those of you who don't know where Aquarius is, it's here within the white box. Here's Key Largo, here's Isla Morada. And inside this area, we have this array of 15 receivers. Here's one of these acoustic receivers being put in place. So just a couple of quick pictures looking at the tagging. This is us on top of Aquarius, handlining down the side into this mass of schoolmaster snapper, which makes it relatively easy to catch them. You catch one, you can open it up, small incision, insert the transmitter, sew it up, and then it's on its way in a few minutes. As you can imagine, that doesn't work quite so well with barracuda, so we catch those at the surface, anesthetize them, do the same surgery, implant the transmitter, and then send them on their way with the transmitter and then the external tag, so we know which ones we've already tagged. And so over the last 15 or 16 months, while we've been tracking these fish, we have a pretty good data set of over 3 million detections split fairly evenly between the two species. So this is a big, rich data set that I haven't got time to go into in detail today, just give you a flavor of some of the results. So this is just the survival plot. Here you can see schoolmaster snapper. We've had pretty good survival, about 18% over the first 12 to 15 months until the batteries start running out. Barracuda, as you might imagine, not quite as good. They roam much wider across a bigger area and are potentially able to be caught and are much more sought after by fishers. So, but we still have, by December at the end of last year, we still had a third of them swimming around. And we can do things like look at their residency index. This tells you how resident they are on Aquarius, barracuda on the left, schoolmaster on the right. Each of these bars is an individual fish, and you can see, as you might expect, the schoolmaster are much more resident on Aquarius. The barracuda wander a bit more widely, but there is quite a lot of variation between individuals. And the other thing we can do is look at their behavior over the course of the days, and you can see barracuda on the left, schoolmaster on the right. The top panel is detections at ARB, the bottom is on the natural reef. And you can see here the barracuda tend to leave Aquarius during the day and forage elsewhere, come back and are quite resident at night. Whereas the snapper do pretty much the opposite. They are there during the day, and then they forage away from Aquarius at night onto the surrounding natural reef. So a very strong diurnal pattern for the snapper in particular. So the question, of course, is where do they go? This is just basic looking at the number of detections on the receivers, barracuda on the left, snapper on the right. Day at the top, night the two bottom panels. You have Aquarius here. The size of the grey circle indicates how many detections we get. So you can see very high numbers of detections around Aquarius. The red box is the SPA, the protected area around Conch Reef. And so most of the action is within around Aquarius during the day. But you can see there are quite a few occasions where the barracuda forage away from ARB during the day and are presumably hunting on these natural reefs. And then in contrast, almost entirely, the snapper detections are all on Aquarius during the day. And then at night, you start to see them foraging away from ARB on some of these natural reefs, although albeit not particularly long distances, within a couple of kilometers. So jumping into the food web modeling, we're using EcoPath, which allows you to build these food web models. This is the food web model for Aquarius reef base. The size of the grey circle is indicative of the biomass. You can see all these barracuda, all these snapper, medium predators. There's always a couple of Goliath grouper. And then the grey lines indicate connections in terms of feeding, so who eats who. So you can build these food web models, and you can do the same for a natural reef. You can see the differences. All these barracuda disappear. There's many fewer snapper, many fewer medium predators, and no Goliath grouper on the natural reef. But what EcoPath allows you to do is look at these food webs and ask, is there enough prey to support all these predators? And again, this is a data set that we're still working with and figuring out, but the initial analysis suggests that no, there's not enough prey, as you might imagine, for all these predators. And in particular, it seems that the planktivores, some of the corallivores, and some of the wrasse are highly overexploited. There's just not enough of them to support all these predators. So there clearly is going to be a subsidy from nearby natural reefs. These predators are going to have to go and feed on the nearby natural reefs to get enough prey. But the scale and the size of that subsidy we're still working on. And so effectively what we're asking is, do predators on artificial reefs, and in particular ARB, change the behavior of fish on nearby natural reefs? And paradoxically, what we might expect is that the fish closer to ARB are less wary. They're bolder because of their very high exposure to predators. The idea being, if you're a parrotfish close to Aquarius, if you stop feeding every time you see a barracuda, you're going to starve to death. So maybe you have to be bolder, put yourself more at risk of predation in order to feed. And so we tested this by using a grazing assay, looking at how parrotfish feed on the assay, and we did this in 3 different seasons, so we've done it 3 different times, each at 5 different sites. So here's Aquarius with the yellow pin, and then we repeated it at these 4 natural reef sites with an increasing distance away from Aquarius reef base. What does the assay look like? Well, it looks like some seagrass blades that are put in closed pegs to hold them in place. Very sought after by parrotfish, and then you have a GoPro camera watching what feeds on them and what comes into the area. And so you can monitor how parrotfish behave towards this assay. And you can do that if exposing it to a very realistic fiberglass barracuda model a couple of meters away, or a snapper model, or just a controlled PVC tube, or a total control, which is just blank, there's nothing there. And so you can compare their response across these different assays. So what you're effectively doing is changing the chronic risk, the background risk, how likely you are as a parrotfish to encounter a barracuda, which will decrease with increased distance from Aquarius, and then look at how that changes your response to an acute risk, that is the exposure to one of these fiberglass barracuda models. So there's a lot of information going on, so just to make it simpler, I'll just blow up a couple of those panels. So here you can see the one for ALB, so this is where all those barracuda are hanging around, and you can see that exposing them to a fiberglass barracuda makes very little difference to their behavior. They're still pretty much as abundant as they would be if there was a PVC tube or a blank with nothing there. So these fish are obviously pretty bold. Adding a fiberglass barracuda makes almost no difference. There's very little effect of that acute risk on their feeding. In contrast, but that might make them more susceptible to being eaten. And in contrast, if you go a kilometre and a half away, you can see that when exposed to that barracuda, the abundance of parrotfish goes way down compared to the other 3 treatments. So this is suggesting that those fish are much more risk averse. They don't meet barracuda very often, and when they do, they stop feeding and leave the area. So here we've got a big effect of that acute risk. So clearly the fish at different distances from Aquarius, these parrotfish are changing their behavior based on that risk. So there is a signal of all those predators on fish behavior on surrounding natural reefs. So just to conclude, these are the initial conclusions from where we've got to so far. We know there's some movement of predators from Aquarius onto those surrounding natural reefs. There's a spatial food subsidy from natural reefs to predators on the artificial reef. It's not self-sufficient. It needs those natural reefs to subsidize the food and make it balanced. Those predators also influence the behavior of fish, in particular parrotfish on nearby reefs. It seems that interaction may be relatively limited in spatial scale, maybe only a few kilometers, but that's not to say that impact isn't significant. So we still need to be very careful when thinking about how close to place our artificial reefs next to natural reefs, which will obviously depend on the management goals of that particular artificial reef. And as I mentioned at the start, we do need to extend this study by thinking about testing larger artificial reefs that are perhaps further from natural reefs, so that we can really understand this relationship between natural and artificial reefs. So I'll finish there. Thanks to FWC for funding this project, to FIU for their support, and I'm happy to take any questions.
I'd like to introduce Carrie Flattery Wallia. She is coming to us from her home in St. Petersburg, Florida, and she's been with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission Research Institute for over 15 years. Welcome, Carrie, and take it away.
Thanks, Keith. I'm really excited to be here to talk to you about a project that we just finished up last year, looking at hard-bottom habitats within the Tampa Bay estuary. Again, my name is Carrie Flattery Wallia, and I'd like to acknowledge my co-authors on this project, also our funding source, and the organizations that were instrumental in making sure that it happens. So since we're at the Florida Artificial Reef Summit, I don't have to tell you how important hard bottom habitat is to the state of Florida. And, you know, that varies from natural hard bottom to the various artificial reefs that have been deployed offshore. So I'll just jump right into the fish communities. And, you know, all of these hard bottom habitats are targeted for recreational and commercial fishing, and mostly because of the very tasty and economically important species such as snappers and groupers. And these reef fish species have very complex life histories. And in order to survey these fish over their entire life cycle, you need multiple survey types. So several reef species as juveniles start off recruiting into mangrove shoreline habitats or seagrass habitats. As they grow, they go into deeper channel habitats and nearshore hard bottom. And as they fully recruit to the fishery, they're in offshore high relief habitats. So in order to sample these life stages, FWC has had an ongoing program for decades looking at the estuaries using net gears such as seines and trawls. And so they have a pretty good handle on where the juveniles are. And more recently, since 2008, high relief, hard bottom habitats offshore have been targeted using gear types such as cameras, traps, and hooked gear that won't damage the habitat. But there is this in-between stage. And we do know that there are some areas that have hard bottom within the estuary. And is this habitat basically linking these two life stages? We don't have a lot of information about estuarine hard bottom as far as, mapping, or as far as, what communities live there. What we do know is that these habitats are easily accessible to anglers. So instead of going offshore 20 miles to go find snapper and grouper, you can go in your backyard and a lot of times get a legal sized fish. The other thing we know about these habitats is that in order to sample them, we can't use traditional estuarine gears. So we're going to have to use something that's similar to what's being done offshore, but obviously these gear types are a little bit of overkill for the shallow areas within the estuary. So the idea behind this project was to look at whether estuarine hard bottom is functioning as a connection between seagrass beds and estuarine habitats and nearshore hard bottom. And in order to do that, we wanted to characterize the fish communities associated with these habitats over time and space. So the methods that we used were alterations of what's currently being done offshore, and I'm not going to go into too much detail about these methods for the sake of time, but I'll basically highlight that we're going to be looking at the baited remote underwater video data, and we altered this gear, basically making it more simple for the estuary, PVC frames and less expensive GoPro cameras instead of the more expensive video cameras that are used offshore. This is a map of our sampling universe. This is the lower Tampa Bay estuary. And all of these boxes here are areas that we know where hard bottom exists based on new mapping that had been done by the Southwest Florida Water Management District. And we stratified these habitats into 3 areas. So the blue boxes are artificial habitats. The green boxes are natural habitats, which you can see that's most of these areas. And it also includes areas like spoil areas. And then also we had a separate strata for bridge. And this is the Skyway Bridge that goes across the lower part of the Tampa Bay estuary. You can see it in the background here. So we completed 192 stations over 3 years, and this was seasonal sampling, so 4 seasons worth of sampling. And this is what these habitats look like. So here's the artificial screenshot of artificial. Here's one for bridge and of natural hard bottom. And when you look at the vertical relief on these habitats, obviously the bridge is going to have the highest vertical relief because that's just the water depth. And then that's followed by artificial habitats and natural hard bottom. And then biota cover, which is things like sponges and coral species that are on top of the habitats, were we had higher percent cover of that in the natural hard bottom areas and artificial hard bottom areas as opposed to bridge. So what about the fish communities? We collected or observed over 2,500 individuals over the 3-year study and almost 80 taxa. For overall catch per unit effort, it was lower in the winter and spring than it was in summer and fall. But as far as differences between habitats, there weren't too many, except for in the summer over artificial where we had some higher numbers of some commonly seen species. And then as far as diversity, you can see in the winter, of each of the 3 years, we had the lowest diversity of species and the highest diversity in the summertime, except for 2019, which I'll talk about a little bit later, why we think that is. The most numerous taxa we saw were pinfish, which were abundant over natural hard bottom and less abundant in the summer, and gray snapper, which are higher over summer and fall, and then over natural hard bottom. If you look at the general fish assemblages, there were significant differences based on habitat, season, and year. Habitat was the most dominant factor influencing these communities. And you can see the circle around these circular symbols, which indicate natural hard bottom. They're all separated out to one side. The artificial, which are the squares, are separated to the other side. And then bridge habitats were kind of scattered and a little more variable. We also saw a seasonal difference, whereas winter and spring, which were blue and green, were separated out from summer and fall, which are the red and black symbols. We can also see differences based on particular species that are associated with these habitats. So for example, sand perch and pinfish were more abundant over the natural hard bottom. Atlantic spadefish and sheep's head, which are our striped fish, were more abundant over bridge, which isn't surprising. And then white grunt and gray snapper were most abundant over artificial habitats and bridge habitats as well. So we wanted to look a little bit at whether there was a potential red tide effect, because in 2018, there was this large red tide that happened throughout the state of Florida that you guys are probably aware of. Year didn't have as much of an effect as habitat and season, but when we looked at pairwise tests, we actually saw that 2019 was significantly different than the other 2 years, which if we were to think there was an effect, we would expect it in that year, because the red tide didn't actually reach the Tampa Bay area until the latter part of 2018. So our sampling wouldn't have captured it until the next year. And if you look specifically at different species that contributed to differences, these 5 main species here were lower in abundance in 2019 than in the other years. So it looks like we've got this great comparison based on red tide, but as with any ecological study, there's always a wrench that gets put into the plan. So we recorded relative visibility over the entire time frame, and here's some examples of what those visibilities look like. And our data is only as good as what we can see on video. And if you look in summer of 2019, we had really variable and low salinity and also really bad visibility. And if you remember, that's when we had the really low diversity in that season. And that was because of above average rainfall and wind events in the summer of 2019. So we could have some visibility constraints that are affecting those differences. But regardless if we saw a red tide effect or not, we saw lots of reef fish, and that was the impetus for this study. We captured lane snapper, white grunt, gag, black sea bass, red grouper, and of course gray snapper on camera. And some of these species we saw more of than were seen in some of the estuarine net sampling over the same time period. We also captured some fish that are infrequently collected in nets, such as bait fish, such as scad, which are normally found offshore, pelagic type fish, such as blue runner, tomtates, which are seen a lot offshore, but not really documented too much within the estuary, and then tarpon, which are just really cool to see on camera. We also had a couple of new observations. This doesn't mean new as far as as far as a new species, but as far as being documented in a monitoring program. So smooth puffer was recorded for the first time in a monitoring program during this this project, and porkfish and cubbyou were also documented, and they haven't been collected in nets. However, they were collected 10 years ago in Z-traps that targeted the same type of habitat, so we know that's where they're living. And also, not just fish. We saw cormorants coming up to try and investigate the bait box, as well as some sea turtles, so we're seeing some really cool things within the estuary. So just to come back to the beginning, what about estuarine hard bottom? Well, it looks like we found some gears that are pretty good at characterizing these fish communities. So that's a good thing. So in summary, our methods were successful and affordable. We had some information, additional information on these habitats, and they do seem to function as an extension of coastal hard bottom based on their communities. We found some diversity differences based on season. Habitat really influenced these fish communities. We documented reef fish and some new and rarely seen species. As far as red tide effects, the jury's still out. We did see that lower abundance, but it was confounded by some environmental factors. So what's next? We're planning on looking at some connectivity between the estuarine seagrass communities, the hard bottom, and then looking at offshore hard bottom habitat, seeing if we can link up some of these patterns in reef fish communities. And there's, of course, some management implications. We would recommend conservation, protection, and continued monitoring for these habitats. So I'd like to thank everyone that was involved in this project and our funding source. And I would love to have any questions.
I'm happy to introduce Lauren Floyd with Coastal Protection Engineering. Lauren has been a coastal biologist consultant throughout Florida for the past 15 years, and she joins us today from her home in Delray Beach. Welcome, Lauren, and take it away.
Hi, thanks so much, Keith. I'm going to talk to you today about monitoring of artificial reefs throughout Florida. I'm going to start with a very brief intro, and then I'm going to focus on the monitoring protocols for mitigation and recreational reefs. And I'm going to wrap up with some basic suggestions for improvement to the recreational reef program monitoring. As we all know, there's several reasons for artificial reefs: recreation, habitat enhancement, coastal protection, and mitigation. They can be built of all sorts of materials, vessels and barges, materials of opportunity. They can be engineered and designed, such as limestone boulders, modules, even sculptures for art. But the focus of my presentation today is going to be on the monitoring protocols. As Keith mentioned, I've been permitting and monitoring reefs throughout Florida for 15 years. And primarily my focus on artificial reefs has been in the mitigation realm. Mitigation reefs are required by regulatory permits to offset impacts to natural hard bottom or coral reef habitat. The amount of acreage required is determined by uniform mitigation assessment method analysis done by the regulatory agencies. And their location is strictly controlled to avoid impacts to other benthic resources and to have a certain level of sediment depth underneath the reef. And the success criteria are clearly defined both in the regulatory permits and in their associated biological monitoring plans. Data is typically collected by county staff, sometimes university students, often consultants like myself, but across the board there is a requirement that the monitoring personnel must be pre-approved by FDEP prior to conducting any surveys. There's been an evolution in monitoring methods of mitigation reefs. There's been a range in the data collected from fauna in the sand to fish census. There's been transplantation of macroalgae and corals to artificial reefs. A whole range of things have been measured and measured in different ways. But over the years, it became very clear that a standardized protocol was needed to make the methods more uniform across the state. FDEP addressed this need by collaborating with other regulatory agencies, coastal counties, and consultants through a series of workshops to find out what methods we thought were most effective in the time we had on these dives. So FDEP issued their standard operating procedures for nearshore hard bottom monitoring in February 2016. It includes the methods and the data analysis required for both hard bottom and artificial reef monitoring. We submit all data to FDEP and they maintain a database of all the reef data. So the DEP SOP includes all sorts of different methods we need to employ on these reefs. They typically require the installation of permanent cross-shore monitoring transects, and along those transects, the biologists collect biological data, physical data. We collect photos and video along the transects, and we also map the perimeter of the reefs. On this slide, you can see on the bottom left is a limestone boulder reef in Manatee County. To the right of that is a concrete reef, also off of Anna Maria Island in Manatee County. Next to that, that's an example of the data we collect within the quadrats along the transect. again, biological and physical data. And to the right of that, that figure shows all the blue areas are artificial reefs off of Anna Maria Island that we've monitored for many years. And the outline is multiple years of monitoring data. And the black lines are transects we've established. So as I mentioned, the monitoring goals are clearly stated. It's designed to document the colonization and succession on the artificial reefs, ultimately to make sure that they do resemble the natural hard bottom, which it's intended to offset impacts to. In addition, in the cases where the artificial reefs are placed close to shore, monitoring can detect if projects such as beach nourishment impact the mitigation itself. As I mentioned, there's the standardized protocols, which means it's a repeatable type of survey and comparable data. So it could be done by different groups and the data can be compared over time or over different sites. A benefit of having these programs, there's added value. You can use this information for other reasons, such as examining impacts or recovery following natural events. I'd like to look at a project example right now. This is the 2011 artificial reef in Manatee County. It's off of the south end of Anna Maria Island. It was built of limestone boulders in 2011. It's about a 5-acre reef, and it was built as mitigation for a beach nourishment project on the island. The regulatory permits did require 3 years of annual monitoring as a compliance requirement, and we did all 3 years of that work. And here's the results. On the left, you can see an example of the data presented in one of our monitoring reports showing the species composition. And after 3 years, it was determined this reef was successful at mitigating the nearshore hard bottom, and the community did develop to resemble that found on natural hard bottom. While it was not a requirement by DEP and is typically not, we often, the biologists, we do like to take some fish lists on these reefs just to have some more information. It takes very little extra time or effort. And so it just gives us that much more of an understanding of the communities that we are monitoring. As I mentioned, these monitoring protocols give you an opportunity to supplement it for other reasons. And on this reef that I'm talking about, Manatee County asked us to revisit some old transects following the 2018 red tide event. And we did that to look at the recovery and impact from this event. And as you can see, before the red tide, these are representative photos from the artificial reef. We actually had to dive and conduct one of our surveys during the red tide event, as you can see in the top right, and things were covered in cyanobacteria. There's a lot of mortality. And when we visited the reef again after the red tide, as you could see, lots of bare hard substrate. It looked scoured. And so as the data in the bottom right shows, the biggest impact we saw is that the sponge community was decimated. And so what you see instead is just clear, clean, benthic hard bottom. So switching over to recreational reefs, while I've primarily monitored mitigative reefs, I have had the opportunity to participate in monitoring of recreational reefs. And I've noticed that for each of those, the parameters we measured differed and the methods differed, which is kind of where this presentation came from. As I mentioned, the recreational reefs are often for improved fishing or diving. The reef type is designed for that goal, and the success criteria, unlike mitigative reefs, they are not required to do monitoring on these reefs typically. When monitoring is done, it's typically on a volunteer basis by the permittee, and the data is really helpful when they apply to the state for future funding for their artificial reef program. So on these recreational reefs, there's a variety of parameters measured utilizing different methodologies. The surveys are done by counties, FWC, volunteers, students, sometimes consultants. The studies and research are often published. However, there's no standardized protocol or database. When the recreational reefs are monitored, the protocol typically includes some kind of physical data, some biological data, typically focusing on the fish communities. recreational usage, and photo and video are typically collected. And while monitoring protocols typically have some combination of these, and there is some overlap in the type of data being collected on different reefs, the methods used don't necessarily align. And that brings me to my conclusion, which is there's a lot of room for us to improve the recreational reef monitoring. First of all, anytime a reef is being considered and discussed, there should be a clear, and the key is measurable, goal and objective to that reef. And there would be a lot of value to using standardized methods for monitoring and analysis of the data. I would suggest that the protocols incorporate some level of physical, biological, and usage data. And the standardized protocol would mean it's repeatable, meaning the reef managers could do it. It would mean university students could repeat it and add on to it with new methods to supplement existing data. Also, one unified artificial reef database would be excellent as a resource to everyone. And of course, coordination between the mitigation and recreational reef programs, specifically FDEP and FWC, they both have so much information, and if that could all be communicated to each other, there would be such a gain to the overall artificial reef community. So I think that would be well worth the time. I want to thank you all for attending this morning, and I want to thank my coworkers and friends, Stacy Buck from Coastal Protection Engineering, Katie Brown from Aptum. They've probably dove on 100 reefs with me over the past decade. And of course, Keith Milley provided a lot of studies to me and helped me bounce some ideas around for this presentation. So thank you all. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for all of those talks, and thank everyone for joining and being active in the chat. My name is Sean Keenan. I'm with FWC, the FWRI lab in St. Pete. Brittany, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Sean. My name is Brittany Hall-Sharf, and I am with the University of Florida, and I'm the Florida Sea Grant agent located in Hernando County.
Thank you. So can we have the speakers who are present turn on their cameras and microphones and be available for answering some of the questions? Thank you guys all for having your pre-recorded meetings. And I think we've already had really good activity in the chat. I do have some other questions, or we can revisit some of these that are going on there. But let me start. I had an interesting one that I think that could be applicable to many of the artificial reefs that are out there. And Chris, I'd like to start with you on this. There was a question: do you believe the pandemic will affect fisheries, like pressure, visitation rates on a lot of the artificial reefs that we have in our areas?
So that's a great question. I mean, the news that was coming out indicated that a lot of people were going offshore during this time. I mean, there were long lines at the boat ramps. And so you would expect to see an increase in fishing intensity. And if you just extrapolate the acoustics data that we've generated, you would expect that to be higher on the artificial reefs. We actually did a formal analysis of this for a group of extracted species, and we did not see a reduction on the artificial reefs relative to our long-term time series. Interestingly, we actually saw an increase on the natural reefs, but we think that was really more due to a boom year for a couple of different species instead of some kind of fishing effect. And in fact, we're part of a global network of researchers that are taking these long-term time series data and looking at the global effects of the pandemic. And we actually have a manuscript in review right now on that. But in this particular system, we haven't detected that yet.
Yeah, I generally see when driving around Tampa Bay during the week or even on the weekends, there seem to be plenty of boats out there taking advantage of the time off or working at home. Matt, we had a question, and some of it was addressed in the chat, and I wanted to kind of come back to this and talking about the increase in highly migratory species, shark species occurring around a lot of these artificial reefs. Can you comment on how you think that could be a potential for behavioral attraction, being attracted there either by increased chumming or increased fishing activity?
Yeah, thanks, Sean. Good question. And I didn't have a chance to really address that in the talk, but obviously, you know, these reefs get used heavily by fishermen and others and divers, and you know, it's hard to say kind of without doing some experiments with extended long-term monitoring and, you know, some reference sites and controls what's going on, but I imagine it probably plays a role. You know, this has sort of come to light because of here in East Central Florida, we're starting to see a lot of depredation, or at least it's being reported more. You know, that's another thing is, you know, is this really, is this real, or is it, you know, just people are better at taking pictures of things and kind of posting them, you know? But I think either way, it kind of highlights, you know, the need to kind of understand, you know, how reliant these species are. I mean, you saw some of the telemetry data from the sandbars we tagged in Texas, and you know, it's certainly not. We've seen other individuals kind of you know, come and go much longer periods, but you know, to me, it suggests that there's something going on. And some of those reefs, though, you know, and this is where I said, you know, the contrast here is that some of those are 50 miles offshore. You know, these are not places that a lot of people can get to frequently. So, you know, I'm not so sure that that plays a role. It probably does, and it's regionally specific. So it's kind of confusing to think about. But, you know, I'm sure in some areas it does play a major role, particularly areas where the reefs are very accessible. But again, we're seeing this in areas where, you know, I don't think there's a lot of fishing pressure. So something to kind of think about with that. But it's a good question and something we're definitely thinking about.
Well, definitely one of the highlights of the ability for the state of Florida to get together and have a summit like this is the benefit is we have such diverse regions. It's also a challenge. And this session has been great because we've had speakers from the Gulf, from the Atlantic, from the Keys region, estuarine areas, as well as offshore. So it does show the challenge of the regional perspective as well as the different habitat types. So for sure. So Dr. Hardborn, there was a question about some of the results providing recommendations for artificial reef managers with spacing of the reefs, some recommendations relative to natural reefs or nearby other artificial reefs. Can you comment a little bit more on that?
Sure. Yeah, so I think the answer that I gave in the chat was a sort of typical academic answer, which is kind of, it depends. But unfortunately, I think that is the truth. I mean, I'm sure people who are managing these things, you know, want a clear distance, you know, this is what you should and shouldn't do. And I do think it really sort of depends on the aims of what you're putting that artificial reef down for. If it's for fish aggregation, if it's to enhance the diving so the divers can have a more diverse experience where they go onto a natural reef and then head over to an artificial reef. Obviously, they have to be close by. You just have to accept that there might be some interaction. I also remind people that the reef that we're working on is close to a natural reef and is relatively small. And so, you know, it would be great to expand this project to think about some of these big shipwrecks, which are not so close to reefs. They're a reasonable distance offshore, often separated by a flat kind of sandy bottom, which again will, you know, is another aspect which will alter the distance, because if you have flat sand that fish don't want to swim over, then that can increase the kind of separation just other than just pure distance. So I think so it will depend on the aims, the size of those reefs, and what kind of interaction you're willing to put up with. If you're happy just for a few barracudas to go feed on nearby reefs, then that's fine. If you want to have complete separation, then I think you need to think about that spacing, and hopefully the analysis that we're doing will, at least for this particular case study, give us a pretty good idea of what the scale of that interaction actually is.
Thank you. Lauren, we had some questions about mitigation reefs and recreational reefs. I'm still a little unclear on those. Can you explain the mitigation reefs? They're generally closer to shore. Can they be snorkel reefs? There were a question about the possibility for snorkel reefs being used.
Hi, yes. Typically, the reason for the mitigation reefs is because beach nourishment projects, coastal projects, are going to impact nearshore hard bottom, so within 1,000, 2,000 feet of shore. So we've run into a conundrum there where DEP would like us to construct the mitigation at a similar depth and a similar distance from shore as the hard bottom that's potentially being impacted by the spread of the sand. However, that potentially would put the mitigation reef at risk of impacts from the beach project. These are expensive reefs to build, to bring in the quarried limestone or to construct the modules. So of course there's an interest by the permittees, by the coastal governments, to ideally have their mitigation reef double as a recreational attraction for people. So they'd love it to be close enough to shore where users could swim out and snorkel. But again, then you run into the issue of you might bury it. And if you impact your mitigation, thereby reducing the acreage of that mitigation reef, you're actually out of compliance with your permits. And so now the permittee would need to build more. So, it's a challenge trying to locate these in an ideal spot. And one thing I've thought of is so many of the artificial reefs that this community, the recreational reef community, monitors is farther offshore. And I wish there was more data on the benthic communities there. Partly it's a little bit self-serving to this coastal beach project industry, in that I'd like to know how far offshore could we build these mitigation reefs and still develop a community that resembles the nearshore hard bottom. Because if we had a better understanding of that, we might be able to more comfortably, and by we, I suppose DEP could possibly more comfortably have the reasonable assurance they need to allow us to construct mitigation a little farther offshore. Because if we build it near the project, we actually don't, we monitor it for colonization and success, but if it's too close to the project, the permittee also has to pay for monitoring the mitigation to make sure it's not impacted by each project. So it does get costly. So in order to optimize the placement, it would be great to have a better understanding of what kind of benthic communities develop on some of the offshore recreational reefs.
Well, it sounds like a lot of people involved with this session, in particular, and then also the greater community here could have those inputs to those type of data sets. I mean, Carrie's work inshore Tampa Bay, working into offshore communities, Chris Stallings' work working in the offshore natural and artificial communities off of Tampa Bay, just one regional example, but combining some of that experience and methods could give some of those answers. I had a question about the data structure that goes into DEP. Is that able to be queried? Are those data available for the community?
That's a good question. I believe it's all accessible, at least by request and coordination by DEP. As far as I know, they don't have something generally accessible to the public. I do think I saw that Jenny Hinton from DEP might be participating, in this summit right now. So I would encourage her, if she's online, even to just write a comment in the chat about that. But no, I don't think that right now it's easily accessible, but I'd like to think that it could be. And, you know, even commenting on some of the previous talks like Carrie's and Chris's, where there's a comparison of natural and recreational hard bottom for fish. Obviously, I was talking about the mitigation reefs, but for all of our projects, if you have a mitigation reef, you also have natural hard bottom data that goes along with it. And in many cases, in areas where you don't require mitigation, you still have natural hard bottom data. So there's essentially this wealth of mitigation reef data, but also natural hard bottom data associated with the state's coastal construction program, the Beach Nourishment Program. And it would be great if that could be of use to artificial reef managers for whatever reason they're planting reefs. So it just seems like we've got this potential for an exchange of data and information that would benefit everybody, no matter what the intent is of their reef or of their studies and research.
I definitely agree. You know, from personal experience and from seeing a lot of the active surveys, many of them are focused on the fish community or the bentha community, rarely is it comprising of both, but it would be good to have access to some of those information as well. Carrie, I wanted to, you know, to bring up the fact that you have this special method for assessing reef fish species in these difficult to get to areas inshore. It's a method that doesn't require putting people in the water. It would definitely be interesting to look down the road to kind of compare some of the data sets that we're seeing from some of the baited remote underwater cameras compared to what Chris's group is seeing with the roving surveys, to see what's missing, what's there. So those type of interactions, I mean, it's right next door.
Yeah, I agree. And I really liked Chris's comparison of the diver versus the rotating camera. That was really, really good. So you know, there's a whole bunch of technologies I feel like right now that are being geared at this particular question. And you know, it'd be interesting to, you know, kind of get everybody in the same room and say, okay, what are the pros and cons to each one? I mean, the pros for ours is that it's inexpensive and we can deploy it in a very shallow area. So some of the areas we were sampling were, you know, 4 feet, you know, so that's not really, you know, conducive for a diver survey really. So, you know, if we can kind of compare and combine some of these to get a better idea of what's happening across habitats, that would be great.
I also have a small ROV that I sort of inherited and I've never used. So if anybody knows how to fly that, we could add that as another comparison, which I think would be really interesting.
Yeah, so would closed circuit rebreather, Chris.
No, thank you. I mean, you know, Bill Lindbergh, you know, talked to me about that a long time ago, and it has some incredible advantages. I mean, anybody that's ever seen a gag underwater knows they're gonna swim away from you as soon as they hear those bubbles, but with a rebreather, you can, you know, pretty much touch them. So there's a lot of advantages, but a steep curve to getting into that whole thing.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Well, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I do have to throw the hook and cut everyone off. So we will see you all back in the virtual platform for our next session, which will be a continuation of the research and monitoring. But don't forget that you will need to click the new Zoom that corresponds to that new session so you can join us again live. And also don't forget to try your hand at our trivia game in the lobby for a chance to win some really cool prizes. So we'll see you guys shortly. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, speakers.